I think we'll first kick off by saying that the African Energy Chamber actually forecasts that there will be about a 40 to 50 billion dollars spend, capex spend annually in Africa between 2026 to 2030, and that is a significant amount of money by any standard.
And our fourth question is, what are the major projects in oil shaping Africa and the trend shaping Africa? So obviously we've talked about a few of the different topics and news stories that have really shaped the continent as a whole, and also some of the projects too, but be interesting just to delve into this a bit more and get your take first of all, Oluropo, but we can start with you with some of those projects and trends that are really making an impact so far.
I think we'll first kick off by saying that the African Energy Chamber actually forecasts that there will be about a 40 to 50 billion dollars spend, capex spend annually in Africa between 2026 to 2030, and that is a significant amount of money by any standard. But where does that money come from? I think that's now I'll talk about where the money comes from, and then some of the projects that I see coming on stream, and the sort of conditions attached to this money. So a lot of that money is coming from private capital. I think that's quite interesting and touches on one of the last points that Musa made, that the governments they don't have enough capacity to be able to pull off that kind of investment, right? And I was still a phrase from Gospel's books is patient capital, right? I think in the past, growing up, every time you thought about a project that required someone to be patient and not require a return very soon, that was government. But recently, that hasn't necessarily been the case. It seemed like in Africa, privatization has really been one of the greatest catalysts for growth, right? And I try not to talk about Dangote anymore. Otherwise, this becomes a Dangote promo.
It's a major
he is a major player, but I think the refinery that I was talking about in the Cabinda region in Angola is majorly funded by GemCorp, which is a UK-based emerging market fund, and that's one out of the lot that is really majorly funded by private capital, right? You have projects in Namibia that are coming on stream in the next couple of years that people should be watching out for. The Orange region or the Orange Basin, Namibia and South Africa are definitely going to be some regions that would have a lot of projects coming on stream in the next couple of years. Mm-hmm. Dangote is also recently, again moving out of Nigeria, but still talking about Dangote, announced an investment of I think 2.6 billion in Ethiopia for energy storage, and those are really useful beyond them just making headlines for investments being made. But I think they're actually very impactful projects that are coming on stream in the next couple of years that people should really be looking forward to. I think the key phrase for me is that any project that is coming on stream is coming with patient capital. The guy that approached Musa and wished for a Dangote wished for another Dangote from South Africa, I think what he really just was saying is that he hopes that they can get patient capital. So I think that's really the key word for me when it comes to all the projects that are coming on stream. But yeah, there are quite a number of projects that are tilting towards improved production, and even from where I sit, from corporate, we are doing a couple of drilling programs that will see increased production, particularly in Angola. But yeah, I'll pass it on to Gospel to give some more light on that.
I mean, really, really brilliant submissions there, honestly. I mean, it's almost covered everything I was going to say, technically. But I think the future of the continent is really bright, really, really bright. We just need to probably tell our stories better. I think the continent still requires, more investments, to be able to unlock not just growth, because it holds the most promising growth aside China. I think about 4%, thereabouts on the average by IMF, compared to other regions in the world. So it's something promising happening there, really. But again, the investments have to be met with clear economic outcomes, or outcomes, particularly for particularly in key economic sectors, sectors that could, that can create jobs and all the likes, and for key economic stakeholders like MSMEs and the likes. Just trying to bring a different angle to this now. And you've got a lot of development finance institutions who are really doing some very heavyweight investments in the sector, in the market. BII is doing a very huge work there. The Climate Investment Fund is doing a lot of work in Africa. The Rockefeller Foundation as well, the Shell Foundation. So lots of development finance institutions are now also looking at Africa, and the models through which they're financing many of these initiatives are also changing. Aside from just being grant-led, they're also looking at some blended finance options as well. And there's also lots of catalytic fund options also going into the region. But the conversation here is that the region itself has to be positioned to not just take on those investments, but also tell its stories better. Tell the stories better. Show what it's doing to the world. Come off with a stronger comparative or competitive edge. In many of its negotiations. So for instance, there's the London Climate Action Week is almost wrapping up, and a major government stakeholder was talking about how we now have solar-led street lights, this kind of stuff. You get what I mean? So we're talking very, I think that is really underselling the potential of what sort of climate investments you need within that vibrant city, in Africa, to be able to unlock growth, at another level. It's beyond just street lights. Anybody can think of that, really. But in terms of powering the sectors that will create the jobs, supporting MSMEs, solar farms, grids, and all those kind of interesting, investments. I think those are the kind of conversations that we need to start having, and also spotlighting our work in such a way that it's attracting the right investors to the table.
Thank you for that, especially your conversation in terms of the job creation. But I just want to touch on that a bit more, that a lot of the time people argue that some of these projects don't lead to jobs being created, especially in the societies and villages in which these refineries are created. And also the impact on the environment is also key. You're producing so much crude oil, you're changing a lot of this crude oil into refined products. Obviously it creates a lot of carbon dioxide and impacts the climate. So how do we basically resolve this, and how do we move in which we're creating jobs but at the same time taking account of the environment?
It's interesting we're talking about this now, and we're just talking about the sort of capital that's flowing through the region, because I was privileged to be part of a financing discussion recently where the financer really wanted to see a clear path to emission reduction. And so I think, first of all, the financiers making a big push to force the government and force anybody doing any of these projects to make sure that they're doing it more responsibly and not destroying the environment where these projects are coming on stream. So that is good news on that side. So, that just says whether they want it or not, they kind of have to, right? But from a job creation perspective, I think it comes in multiple folds. The governments have also demanded in a lot of these projects that certain roles are filled locally, and that's the way that governments have stepped in to ensure that the job creation is not done externally but actually helps the community. I think those are sort of two initiatives that I've seen help to drive the job creation from just conceptualization to actual actualization, and make sure that the environment doesn't get destroyed while creating value for the broader audience, right? It's always good to look at the bigger picture, but you can't ignore the people that are around all of these projects, right?
Gospel, same question to you.
Yeah, I mean, the job market in Africa is largely informal than formal, and the framework or mechanism around through which young people arrive at fulfilled or dignified work is largely informal than formal. So even though you have lots of conditions that come around to say, okay, reserve a certain quota of your whatever, for local people and all that, there are big conditions around capacity, big conditions around skill, but most importantly, bigger conditions around access to the market opportunities to start with. So I think Africa still needs to, get a lot of work done around how we create the jobs, how young people are actually, and by the way, you have a lot of young people who are also upskilling, but there are no market opportunities for those jobs. So the context for innovation, the market itself is not growing or expanding at the level of innovation where it's able also to take on new skill sets within the ecosystem and get young people gainfully, employed or engaged and all of that. So I think it's more or less a demand and supply side conversation, and how the bits around the oil and gas investments within the region are enabling that. To a large extent, I think government needs to work very closely with more private sector leaders, more young people, more community stakeholders to really understand the job dynamics and how these investments trickle down to the last mile.
Sure, and it'll be very interesting to see if that happens in the future, the trickling down of potential jobs. But Musa, let's pass it on finally to you one more time. So once again, going back to those trends and projects that you find fairly fascinating, and where you think the future holds for these trends and projects in Africa.
Yeah, so the Angola, of course, I think the only project that I didn't hear mentioned was a project that's also happening like in Uganda. It's not that big, 60,000 barrels in Hoima Refinery. But I think the future for Africa is slightly bright, right? And I'm saying that very intentionally because we're now starting to see private players willing to put skin in the game. You are essentially global capital looking for projects in Africa that are most likely, like find this private players. So I think it's kind of like a destiny defining moment we're entering right now. Just, a few things about the jobs market. I think I actually did the math one time, because if you combine like the big companies in Nigeria currently, so aside Dangote Refinery, but they just employ about 10,000 Nigerians. Like in the grand scheme of things, that is very, very little. And as already discussed, I think we just need to think very, very profoundly about the kind of context we're in. I think original thinking is necessary to be able to solve the jobs issue, to solve productivity, because I don't think, even these refineries will solve a tenth of the problems that are in the job market. I think that is another conversation entirely. And even with the government inefficiencies, the truth is that we still can't do it without the government. So the government is a necessary evil, I would say, in this case, right? So how do you make the government, create the environment, create the incentives necessary, first of all, for all of these projects to thrive, but then secondly, is for the kind of people needed on these projects to be from the continent as well. I don't know if you see the management team in Dangote, they are mostly Indians, they're not Nigerians, so that's another factor. If it's not there, the government will practically change some things to fix the issue.
Liking this video so far, please take a moment to give us a like, hype, and subscribe. And don't forget to turn on your notifications so you never miss an update from us. For more deep dives and one-on-one interviews, you can listen to our podcast, The Afribond Sessions, either here on YouTube or on Spotify. On the Afribond Sessions, we speak with leaders and key stakeholders across Africa and the African diaspora to explore the business, the ideas, and trends shaping the continent. You can also visit our website to learn more about the work we do at Afribond and our upcoming events.